Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is a show where we take a look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And of course, we always talk about sustainable design as well. This is our 100th episode. All right, an incredible milestone, and we've decided to celebrate by sharing just a few of our favorite moments from past shows. One of our earliest guests was a building scientist from the University of Berkeley, Dr. Stefano Schiavone. Now, why does this episode mean so much to me? Stefano showed me just how deep the rabbit hole really goes. I started to understand what occupant comfort really is all about, and I started to understand that with a little bit of, properly directed research, we can find solutions that achieve comfort and occupant health objectives and do so without adding costs, sometimes actually reducing costs, and still reduce carbon emissions. Have a quick listen to Dr. Schiavone.
We want a view for much more fundamental aspect, that is the desire to be connected to the outdoor, ideally to nature, the desire to be in a dynamic environment. You remember when we discussed earlier about the issue of the peak condition? I think that that idea is problematic, because that idea led us to think that, we could put people in a box, give the perfect light, the perfect temperature, the perfect noise, and people will be happy. It's like to say, I'm going to force you to eat pizza. I think pizza is great, but if you eat it every day, at a certain point you will get tired.
I had always known that there was a strong correlation between sunlight and circadian health. I can't say that I truly understood the whys and the hows of that connection until I spoke to Dr. Alstan Jakubiak from the University of Toronto. Alstan is one of the most respected building scientists in North America, and it's not hard to understand why. His work on urban heat island effects should be read by every city planner in North America, but I was especially excited about the parts where we talked about daylighting. Have a listen.
Generally, we have photoreceptors in our eyes, our rods and our cones, and those are visual receptors. We have a visual signal from them. We also have a fifth or an additional photoreceptor from what's called an IPRGC, or an intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cell. And that one is not visual. It doesn't send a visual signal. It is reactive to light, but it's connected directly to basically a part of our hypothalamus in the brain, and it plays a really critical role in regulating our entrainment to an actual 24-hour day with regards to the light exposure we receive each day. It can, if you travel across a bunch of time zones like I just did, or relatively recently, then the light being received at different times of day will slowly bring you to that 24-hour photo period rather than the one you were living in before. Right. It also has a lot of instantaneous effects. So light exposure can drive increases in alertness and reaction time at certain times of day. Like in the evening, it can suppress melatonin. And so non-image forming light is a kind of, or non-image forming lighting, or NIF lighting, is a kind of catch-all frame terminology that is not necessarily the perfectly scientifically agreed upon one. The CIE prefers IPRGC influence lighting, but it's meant to kind of encapsulate all of these not visual but health-related aspects of lighting.
Dr. Blaine Brownell from the University of North Carolina at the Charlotte campus absolutely blew my mind as he shared his ideas about building materials for the future. He also had a lot to say about a lack of design in green design, which is a very interesting conversation. And he gave me one of my favorite terms that I still use, and that is conspicuous green. Have a listen.
I think most people, well, I don't know most, but a lot of academics and practitioners, let's just say, appreciate that innovation often happens at the seams between disciplines or fields and interchanges between them. And that is the case. But it's too easy to get kind of stuck in a rut of how we do things and teaching our classes or practicing, designing the buildings the way we've always designed them, which also comes, it's kind of the reality for materials as well. Gradually, we are seeing positive changes. These are happening both kind of top down and bottom up. I think in terms of top down, if you will, the major granting agencies like NSF and NIH are beginning to adopt more sort of interdisciplinary language as part of their grant, sort of major grants, to encourage interdisciplinary teams to submit. At the university level, we're seeing more activity. We have, in our college, we have something called Art Sci grants. So these are arts and sciences. And to submit, you have to have members of the College of Arts and Architecture and outside disciplines that include the sciences. It could be, medicine or engineering or other things as well.
Dr. Russell Foster from Oxford University is a winner of the Daylight Awards for his contribution to daylighting. He identified the non-image forming photoreceptors that help us to adjust our internal clocks to the actual 24-hour clock. He's got a whole lot to say about sleep and health. And this is a great episode, even if you have no connection to architecture and buildings. This is fundamentally about human health.
Essentially, the quality of our wake state is defined by the quality of our sleep state. So our ability to lay down memories, for example, is happening while we sleep. But it's not just the retention of facts. What's so exciting is that we're problem solving. We're coming up with innovative solutions to complex problems that we're thinking about. Jan Born in Germany did the most wonderful experiment. He devised a really quite challenging cognitive task. And he introduced this task to one group in the morning to become familiar with the task. And they performed it that afternoon. And about 20% of the group solved the problem. The next group introduced in the morning, but they performed it the following afternoon, but they were deprived of sleep. And about 20% solved the problem. So again, a low level. However, the exciting group, of course, is introduced the task in the morning, performed it the following afternoon, but with a full night of sleep. 60 to 70% of the group solved the problem. I just think that's such a brilliant illustration of what's going on in the brain whilst we sleep. We also now know that the removal of toxins and one particular misfolded protein called beta amyloid. And that, of course, has been associated with the development of Alzheimer's dementia.
At the time of recording, Lila Allen was the Associate Director at Architectural Digest Pro. This is one of our first real conversations about design and the artistic side of design. As our followers know, I geek out a lot with our building science and engineering guests. So it was absolutely wonderful to turn on the other side of my brain and talk about trends in design and beauty with Lila.
I think it's hard to have a conversation about the built environment without talking about wellness in some form or another. How you talk about wellness, there's many ways to do it, right? You can talk about health, you can talk about social well-being and social connection, you can talk about psychological health, you can talk about neurodiversity. There's so many ways that you can talk about it. So I think it's a sort of inevitable part of the conversation. Certainly recently, COVID-19 highlighted just how much we rely on our spaces to keep us safe. I did not have strong feelings about the operable windows in my own apartment until I suddenly was sharing a home with a sick husband. So now it's a non-negotiable. We got to have those windows open if he's sick. So the majority of our readers are professionals. They're working in the single family residential space. So for them, the question of wellness really relates to client satisfaction. Does the client feel comfortable? Does the client feel supported and healthy in the space they live in that the designer has made for them? Can they get restful sleep? I know that's a big topic of conversation right now. Can they breathe clean air? We've had smoke from the fires this past year here in New York coming down from Canada. I know Canada's probably experienced it as well. So air purification was certainly on the radar this year.
Marcel Harmon is the R&D lead and an associate principal with Branch Pattern in Overland Park in Kansas. Marcel has a PhD in anthropology. And he took me to school on how you can apply the science of anthropology to building design and operation. This was, again, another episode that was absolutely mind-blowing for me. I learned so much, and my ideas about building design were changed forever. Truly forever. This episode would make any best of or greatest hits list for any podcast.
I mean, so on the one hand, you've got architecture, you've got the built environment, right? And it's really, that's not just a constructed thing. I like to think of it more of like a living organism, right? It's composed of individual occupants, and each person has their own physiological and psychological needs, and they're in varying degrees of alignment or mismatch with one another. And then there's the organizations that are part of the facility, right? Composed of those individual occupants, subject to their own policies and conventions, and in varying degrees of alignment with the broader cultural norms of society and the communities that they're a part of, right? And then those groups, they interact with one another within an environment and that shapes or constrains, helps or it hinders what they're trying to do on a day-to-day basis, right? That the environment is both the physical building itself that we built, but it's also the social cultural environment. It's both of those things together that influence what people do on a day-to-day basis of the decisions that they make. So you have the architecture, the building occupant organism, right, on the one hand, but then on the other hand, you have anthropology, which at its core is just simply the study of people, right? Why we are the way we are, why we do the things we do, right? How we got to be this way. And so we're studying the human physical form. Anthropologists study human societies and cultures, languages, human manipulation of their environments, right? Studying all those things across space and time.
Anybody who listens to construction podcasts knows Adrian Lowenstein. He is the host of the All Things Facade podcast, and he gave a masterclass in facade engineering in 40 minutes. It's really easy to see why he is one of the most popular podcasters in the world of commercial construction. Check it out.
Just having a view, either in an office environment or in your home, how much ease and calmness it gives you and what that means to people. I mean, I think in a world where we're dealing with, as we discussed, more stringent energy requirements, in multifamily applications, there's discussion of lowering the window to wall ratio. So now you get to 25% windows, and everybody says, I don't want to live in a box with tiny windows. But through intentional design, I think when you factor in window placement, height versus width, where that actual natural daylight is going to come in, there's ways to properly play with sun shading, daylight, window placement to find that perfect sweet spot. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a compromise in the negative direction if you lower the window to wall ratio, but you have to factor in, I think it's a number one priority in these commercial building use cases, is factoring in the occupants and considering what their experience is going to be like, because that's ultimately who you're trying to attract into that building space.
Our next featured guest is Jeremy Knoll from BNIM Architects in Kansas City. He's their Director of Sustainability and Regenerative Design. And I love this episode because Jeremy is passionate, he's knowledgeable, he's articulate, he's optimistic, and he's full of joy. We talked about everything from occupant wellness to environmental justice. This is an episode you want to check out.
Well, I'll say that agnostic of certification at BNIM, part of our recommitment to sustainability is that every project must set goals in 6 areas, which are energy, resources, equity, ecology, water, and wellness. And so every single project, whether it's a little coffee shop remodel or a $1 billion airport terminal, we're using the same kinds of criteria to understand what are our energy goals, what are our daylight goals, what does the character of health and well-being in this space look like. And all of the goals that we've set can roll into almost any certification system. So by establishing goals early, regardless of certification, it helps us then to build the case and talk about, for this particular building, we think WELL certification might make sense because you're so health focused. We are also going to look at things like embodied carbon and energy on top of that. But for certification for your particular building type or your approach to your business, this certification might make more sense than this other one. I will say, though, that LEED certification is by and large really the standard that we see that sets the bar for us.
Lisa Hashong is a living legend. I was a starstruck fanboy during this episode. I described Lisa as the godmother of healthy, sustainable design, and she is. Her work on daylighting in schools has changed all of our worlds. If you haven't listened to this episode, you owe it to yourself to go back and make that happen.
One of the threats that I see is an assumption that daylight can be successfully simulated or mimicked with electric technologies. And so if I use these newfangled dynamic LED color changing lights, I will have done my part in providing a healthy circadian stimulus environment. If I, like Charles Munger for the UC Santa Barbara dorm that caused a fluff up 2 years ago, if I provide artificial windows on the back of bedrooms, I don't need windows for bedrooms because we've got a pretend window that will do a good enough job. And what I've said is that those technologies are placebos. They don't provide the full effect of daylight or views, but they make people feel better. They make them feel that they have addressed the issue. And they certainly allow the electric lighting industry to try to steal the most fundamental value that windows and architects can provide with good daylighting.
Paula Longato is a lighting designer from Bureau Appold in Berlin. She's a daylighting zealot, and she really helped me understand the intricate dance between natural light and artificial light in building design. This is still our most listened to episode since we started the podcast. Everyone wants sunshine in their buildings, but not everyone knows how to do it right. Listen to Paula Longato.
I think we all have some kind of heard already some kind of quote from very famous architects saying, how they integrate daylight into their architecture, how important it is that daylight is there, and without daylight there is no architecture. And what we are trying to raise awareness here for is that, the architecture doesn't work alone. So there is an intrinsic connection to the way architecture allows daylight inside or not. And so and with architecture, we can create so many different types of spaces. We can create exterior spaces, interim spaces, interior spaces, shaded spaces, sunlight-based spaces, etc., etc. And so daylight has the quality of transforming architecture also. So if there is some light outside, then architecture reacts in a different way than it does when the sky is overcast. And so the daylight conditions changes the way also we perceive architecture. This is what we're meaning by daylight makes architecture, right?
James Garrett Jr. is an award-winning architect from Formula, that's 4RM plus ULA, in St. Paul, Minnesota. James is a great artist, a great architect. He helped me to understand how architecture could be a force for positive social change. He shared his ideas on the connection between architecture and music. He talked about designing for occupant dignity and not just comfort. Dignity, I love it. And so much more in this episode. It was truly inspiring. This is one that you have to hear.
So anybody who has skills can just do a whole bunch of stuff. But it's the genius that can take those skills and know when the proper moment to apply them, when to pause, when to give space, when to enter, when to fall back, how to engage in this dialogue. And so to me, I started to really think about not just frozen music in the sense that it's just this physical thing, but it's also this dance, right? It's this opportunity to lead and then follow and then fall back and then pause and then breathe. And it's a dance, it's an interaction. And I really wanted to think about physical manifestations of that. So I started to think, how do people sort of approach a building or a place or a space, right? What do they see? What captures their attention visually as a visual artist? I'm thinking compositionally. What do people see as they approach a space? What prompts them to want to approach it and to enter it?
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful, natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. What can I say about Nick Bagatellos? He is one of the most respected names in the glass industry in North America. Nick's passionate, he's articulate, he's funny as hell, and he just doesn't hold anything back. We talked about the promise of vacuum glass, the importance of retrofits and how to do it right, the technological, the structural barriers that will ensure that some of the glass-based innovations that seem really cool will just remain as novelty products forever. We talked about the importance of light and views and the really pressing need to improve framing, thermal performance of framing. So much more. You want to hear, Nick. You want to hear this episode.
If you move into a cave and you have 36, 40-inch thick walls, and you put a little fire in the cave, you're going to warm that place up. And cavemen did just fine for millions of years. But we're not cavemen. We need windows in order to be human beings, right? And if you have a full big window like this, I think your life is more human than having a window that's 30% window to wall. I don't think anyone's going to argue with you. But when we have an existential issue with global carbon, then you have to go back and forth between those two things. What I believe is this. In California, a Title 24, which is the code requirement for a window, is R2.4, and for a wall, it's R20. If you have a piece of vacuum glass that's R20 and 3/8 of an inch, we have the possibility of creating transparent walls that are R20. That is our future. So today, the price point is not conducive to that, but over the next decade, the cost to manufacture vacuum glass is going to drop, and it will open the opportunity to have every wall in a building transparent and have the energy efficiency on that R value, on that conduction and convection.
Pascal Sablon is the CEO of the New York office of Adjay Associates out of London. Pascal introduced me to the idea of architecture as activism and how structures can give back to the community. Her story is inspiring, and she shares her journey from the Haitian diaspora through a career maze with very few Black female architects at the time. She's a former president of NOMA. She's the founder of the Beyond the Built Environment. She's an AIA fellow. And beyond her work with Adjay, she is a passionate advocate for diversity in design. I could go on and on about this amazing woman, but you're just better off to listen to the episode. And I'll just give you one warning. I pronounced her name wrong with my terrible East Coast Canadian accent. So forgive me, Pascal. You are wonderful.
What makes a great building is a building that's co-created with community. It's a structure that gives back. It's a sustainable structure that doesn't extract the resources of the ground that it's in, but actually fuses and brings in elements to that community. A great building is a project that is manifesting and elevating and fortifying the identity and culture of the community that it's impacting. It's a project that is innovative and pushes the boundaries of what is possible. It's a project that heals. It's a project that repairs. It's a project that makes one excited and happy and people to thrive. It's a project that the community feels that they're part of, that they belong to, that they have access to, that they and their families are part of the team that makes it come to fruition. And it's a project that teaches. It's a project that lets people learn and know not just about what's on the site immediately, but what was there before and before that, and why it's different and what it really symbolizes through that practice.
The new Volvo VRSE, which stands for Volvo Retail Sustainable Experience, has led to the creation of extraordinarily comfortable and energy-efficient showrooms. Beautiful showrooms as well. Julian Pastor from Volvo Canada and Bryce Jarman from R.H. Carter Architects in Toronto talked to me about the revolutionary design of Volvo dealerships and the future of design in bricks and mortar retail. This is a cool episode.
I think part of this program and creating a building for humans, as you mentioned, is it's really that customer journey from when you walk in the front door to the showroom. You have a comfortable environment in the showroom. You have a more intimate, comfortable space in the customer lounge. And it's, it's designed to make you feel like you're in a living room. That's what it's referred to. And the clean water coffee bar, it's made to reduce things like single-use plastics, make you feel comfortable, and using natural elements like a porcelain mug, and there's fresh water accessible. And then going beyond even the customer journey, the employees are part of it too. We've been to the new BRC stores, and they have nothing but great things to say in terms of the lighting and temperature. It's all consistent due to this new design, and a big part is the Solera glass that reduces that heat sink that gets created when you have the sun beating on it. It diffuses that light, reduces the heat. And in our most recent store in Laval, they've actually used the Solera panels throughout the shop as well. So the entire service department now gets a better, softer light to work in.
I had the absolute honor and privilege of having a conversation with Lone Pfeiffer and Jens Christofferson from Velux to talk about their Living Places project and to talk about daylighting in general. We also took a look at the LKR Innovation House. Velux is the world leader in skylight manufacturing, and they reinvest heavily in creating healthier, more sustainable buildings through natural light. This is a fun, lighthearted episode about a very important topic. You'll love these guys.
One of the things that is a challenge with windows, facade windows in general, is that, the light from the windows drops quite quickly in when it passes through the glass and come into the room. So it drops quite quickly. So if you have a space with a certain distance or certain depth, there will be places where you feel that it's a little bit gloomy. But having the ability to add skylights in a roof or skylights in a flat roof or a ceiling, we can then lit up places in the room where we can say it's not that well lit up from the facade windows. That is one other part. The second part is that very often our products is placed, in the roof where you can see quite a lot of the sky. And when you see quite a lot of the sky, of course, you are able to get more daylight coming into the room. We are not as sensitive maybe to urbanizations and so on because many of our residential products is very often in the suburbs or in the attics of buildings, and by that can bring a lot of daylight coming in because we are not always shadows by neighboring buildings and other things like that. So it brings a lot of daylight coming in, and of course that is essential. In our perspective, that is essential for us as human, that we can have daylight in our space.
Eric Corey-Fried of Canon Design is a sustainable design rock star. He's a pioneer in regenerative and restorative design. He's funny, he's engaging, and he's challenging all of us to think differently about how we design and build. Eric introduced me to his revolutionary idea of prostruction, growing building materials through synthetic biology. Yes, you heard correctly, while emphasizing the importance of natural light on well-being. He's authored 12 books, including Green Building and Remodeling for Dummies and Circular Economy for Dummies. There's that sense of humor I warned you about. If you don't know Eric's work, you need to check out this episode. You need to go back and listen to the whole thing.
It's very easy to take an existing design and then add sustainability. One of the things I say to my clients all the time is sustainability is not cinnamon. You can't just sprinkle it on top, right? You really have to weave it in from the outset. And the result is so much better, right? For example, if you start with a very deep, wide floor plate, like a floor plan that's really deep and wide, well, that's going to limit how much daylight I can kind of penetrate into that building. But if I take a daylighting first approach where the shape of the building, the shape of the plan is really centered around, we're going to run this east to west, we're going to have controlled daylight throughout the day, we're going to design the floor to floor height and really design the windows and everything to bring daylight as deep into the building as possible without glare. Like suddenly now I've changed the form of the building, but I've woven into the DNA of it some larger experience. And that's where the that kind of initial spark of beauty starts to come in. You can't just slap it on top. It does. I mean, there are buildings that are beautiful that I guess have done that. But to me, I find that I do this gesture of kind of interweaving my fingers all the time, whatever this, the two spiders humping gesture thing, right? I do that gesture around my teams all the time of like, this is what we're after, of trying to really integrate this idea of what's driving these sustainability decisions and these design decisions is one and the same.
Craig Schiller is executive director of CHIPS, the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. We talk about the need to create schools that prioritize student and teacher well-being, prioritize productivity and safety, while simultaneously addressing climate resilience. CHIPS is now part of the U.S. Green Building Council. I don't know if anybody missed that. They are now part of USGBC, and that organization is working towards providing more support for high-performance educational facilities. What a great move bringing in CHIPS. This is an excellent and very timely episode. Go back and listen to this one if you're involved in school design at all.
So what are the attributes of a building that help with productivity? Things like daylighting. The data and science shows how valuable that is to students' productivity and their attention span. Acoustics, oxygen levels, right? These are all proven to have a quantifiable effect on an individual's performance and ability to perform. Mental well-being is another one, right? We need students to grow and thrive in their built environment. This is the second environment that they spend the most time with. First, it's home, then it's schools. In some students' cases, the school is their safest, healthiest, it's their place to thrive. They may not have that at home. So what does mental wellness and mental well-being look like in a school? We know from the science that decluttering classrooms de-stresses the brain. We know views in nature de-stresses the brain and provides joy. We know that outdoor play areas provide those same joys and outdoor learning experiences that have this intrinsic value to children. Health is another big category. Indoor air quality, clean water, attributes that we know have a quantifiable effect on asthma, on attendance, on teacher retention, etc. So the other categories I put in there, safety and security is a big one. And a high performance school hides its hardening elements, its safety hardening elements in a soft environment.
Mawish Syed is a design visionary, a neuroaesthetics expert, and the author of Purgatory to Paradise. She helped me to understand the intersection of beauty, biology, and building design to create spaces that heal, that inspire, and that restore balance for us. Mawish shares her transformative journey from a cancer survivor to a design innovator. She reveals how neuroaesthetics and biophilia can shift environments from purgatory to paradise. She explains how lighting, materials, and even layout impact circadian rhythms, mental health, and just overall well-being. She's a beautiful person, and this is a beautiful episode.
Simply by and I tell this all the time, opening your window. Opening your window, because you and I both know a lot of these modern windows are glazed, they're laminated, they block certain parts of the UV, which for building science helps you save some dollars, but we need the full spectrum of that light in order for our skin to understand what's going on. So we have photoreceptors not just in our eyes but all over our skin. So getting that sunlight on our skin, and since sunlight is not polarized, it can bounce off surfaces. So in a pragmatic way, you know what I've done? I'm like a vampire hunter, Joe. I design ways where I do mirrors perpendicular to the window. I put high gloss on ceilings to bring and transfer light into the space. I use mirrors all the time to create that, not just to enhance the view, but to bring as much light into the space. And if you're opening that window, you're getting the full spectrum of the light. I tell my clients, open your window just a few inches in your car. Car windows are tinted. So just that simple act of opening a window changes your body's perception.
Roger Wilkerson is a practice leader in healthcare for Little Architects in Charlotte, North Carolina. I don't know if anyone could provide a more clear, more thorough explanation of the design principles for healthcare facilities. This episode is truly a masterclass. If you're involved in hospital design, you want to listen to this episode. If you're not involved with hospital design, it's still absolutely mind-blowing to understand what goes into designing a hospital. Check it out.
Several years ago, we were working with a hospital and trying to find a way to have a better patient experience. And so we were studying a lot of different things. And we had an acoustical consultant come in as part of our team. And he did what you heard. He spent the night at the hospital and report on some recommendations. But the thing that got my attention, and logistically it makes sense, but the thing that got my attention, his suggestion was stop waxing the floors at 2 a.m. And it was, I had floors that needed to be waxed.
Yeah.
There's no traffic at 2 a.m.
Right.
You have a housekeeping team that's there. So like I say, from just a pure logistics standpoint, what better time to do it?
Right.
But he's out there, he's buffing that thing, he's bumping into walls and everything. And so it is, you got to step back and realize, okay, we have people that are working night shift. The rest of the world, we're asleep when we're trying to sleep. And so there are things like that we can look at. You know, we've all had that experience where we've been in the hospital with a loved one and the coming and going and all. I think, you know, a lot of the teams look and see what is truly necessary. What do we need to be coming in there? And during the different levels of acuity that the patient is dealing with obviously impacts that.
Short lifespan, single-use plastic glazing is not a sustainable solution for daylighting. Solera is the glass-based alternative for the new millennium. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Marta Delgado introduced me to the world of neuroarchitecture. I was hooked from the very beginning. Marta is an architect, a researcher, and a passionate advocate for research-informed design. She's the head of community development for the Center for Conscious Design, and she created the Architecture with Meaning platform. This was a life-changing conversation that you'll want to check out.
I love the idea of a recharge room, and this concept came from Studio Elsewhere, who is I believe, New York-based studio of architecture that during the pandemic, they worked with hospitals in New York to support the nurses that were going through so much stress responding to the pandemic and all the patients. And what they did is create little rooms, both within the hospitals and outside of it, with inflatable structures that were filled with different pleasant sensorial elements, with images of nature, with sounds, with candles, with soft lights that would allow nurses to recharge. So they could take like a 15 or 20-minute break and sit down in this room and just relax. And they were actually able to pair with researchers and measure the level of stress of the nurses before and after. They saw that there was a 60% reduction of stress by using these recharge rooms. And I thought it was such a brilliant idea that we should have them everywhere.
Our second guest from Little Consolidated Architects was Garrett Herbst. This is a great episode for someone to geek out on. We talk about computational design, AI in architecture, parametric modeling, and digital fabrication. We also cover regenerative design, microalgae facades, and mass timber construction. And we talk about pushing the boundaries of what's possible in sustainable architects. All my fellow geeks out there, this is the one for you.
There's a lot of reasons why a client would be happy to know that we're using and leveraging these computational techniques. One is that they are higher quality. It leads to better accuracy, better documentation, more detailed documentation. It allows us to iterate faster, right? So before, right, when you would have to hand render a elevation to show a client what the building would look like, that would take a really long time. Now I can do 3 to 5 options of an entire building design and render it in 3D with the materials that we'll have in the environment that it's going to be in, and really give the client a much better sense of what they're going to get, and to allow them to be able to react to it and give much more focused feedback than they would before. And it really just leads to more innovative designs and a more efficient process. We can do projects quicker. We can do them much more detailed, like I said. And it really just results in better projects moving forward, as well as higher coordination with the contractors, right? The people who are building the actual architecture. We're getting to a point now where we're actually sharing our BIM models, our 3D models with the contractors so that they can actually see in 3 dimensions what they're trying to build and what our intent was.
Art Hance is the owner of Hance Construction in Washington, New Jersey. Art has been leading the charge for sustainable design and even daylighting in the metal building industry for decades. He's a true pioneer and a visionary. I bet no one thinks about metal buildings as being highly sustainable, but when you listen to Art, you will recognize that metal buildings are leading the way in circular building economies.
I think right now I'd have to check what the current percentage is, but I think that close to half of low-rise, non-residential buildings are built with, a metal type building. And a lot of that is because of the, if you're basing it on square footage, there's a lot of big buildings out there being built as metal buildings. I just think that as we get more sophisticated with our exterior panels and the things that we can do, you're going to see more and more of it. And MBMA right now has a credit course for architects, and I've presented it several times, on improving the aesthetics of metal buildings. And the architects they're happy to see it. And, they're starting to incorporate some of those ideas.
Nathan Stadola was one of my favorite surprises. I saw his LinkedIn pic, which is him in a tree playing an accordion. And I thought, this is going to be a fun interview. And I was right. Nathan is the chief engineer at the International Wellbeing Institute. The WELL certification is all about keeping humans healthy in buildings. And Nathan provides an accurate, comprehensive, and totally fun breakdown of the 10 core concepts behind WELL version 2. WELL is the fastest growing building certification, and Nathan does an amazing job helping us to understand why that's the case. Check it out.
Light. So within light, we want to promote daylight, both because of the energy concerns and also by providing all of this light, you can effectively help people with managing their sleep-wake cycle. People have a circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour rhythm. That's roughly 24 hours. That's why it's called circadian, circa meaning about, dia meaning day. And it needs that bright light during the day to synchronize your 24-hour cycle with the actual 24-hour cycle of the sun. So all of the daylight that you're having there is going to help with the bright days, dark nights that'll keep your system in check. Also, by having electric lights that's shining in the right way, that's shining for the light that is reaching the eye, that can help supplement this in areas that don't have as good daylight. In addition, of course, we are looking at effective light for all of your tasks, making sure the light hitting your task, the table, the floor, the hallway, is also enough that people can do their work or maneuver safely through this space. And looking at light quality, the color rendering index, so high color quality, low glare, high controllability, low flicker.
I waited so long to have someone from the Daylight Academy on the podcast. And I can't tell you how excited I was when they told me that Dr. Marilyn Anderson from EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland, would be joining me on the show. Not only did we talk about the Daylight Academy, but we were also able to dive into her own research interests at the university. The more we learn about the positive health effects of exposure to natural light and the extreme negative effects of partial spectrum light, the more we recognize that we have to bring the sun into buildings. We have to do more daylighting. Trust me on this one. Take the time to listen to Marilyn Anderson talk about this critical health matter.
We evolved outdoors with the photo period as being the driver of our own time. And once we moved indoors with electric lighting, we are now at least in urban environments, in chronically light deprived environments during the day and probably overlit environments in the evening. So we delay our kind of biological day through these means. Nights are not dark enough. There is light pollution, and therefore the contrast between day and night has been reduced. So all of these have health implications and well-being implications. And this movement about the right to light is going back to the roots of we are starting to lose something that is essential to our lives. And as a matter of fact, I have co-developed with a design firm in Paris called Vraiment Vraiment, an art installation that is currently on show in a museum here in Lausanne that is called Droit au jour, the right to light. And that is literally a kind of a fiction, an administrative fiction of a utopian administrative office that would be there to ensure you have the right to light, the right to daylight or to the day.
Tim Rossi recognizes the severe impact that buildings can have on our bodies and every aspect of our life. Tim has created architectural medicine in the ArxMed platform, ARXMD platform. And this platform helps doctors to diagnose illnesses that result from unhealthy buildings. Joseph Allen, who wrote the book Unhealthy Buildings, says that the person that manages your building has more of an impact on your health than your doctor. Now, Tim Rossi gets that, and his amazing work will help us to quickly diagnose building-driven health problems and provide suggestions for medical treatment, as well as providing a path forward for improving the conditions within the building that caused the problems in the first place. Instead of just talking about it, Tim is helping us to make positive changes that can improve our quality of life and save lives as well.
So, lighting in general has such a big impact on us. We, of course, I know you're deeply involved in this field, and I've learned quite a lot actually in many of your podcasts and those discussions. You can't, and this is actually something that I will comment on with architectural medicine. In my first book, Architectural Medicine, I took the time to provide an overview of many of these topics because the way that I have learned these topics has been kind of piecemeal. So I learned a bit of green building, I learned a bit of sustainable building, I learned a bit of healthy building. I was lucky enough to work with people who saw the big picture, but most of the people that I was learning from, it was, kind of piece by piece. In my opinion, though, you cannot separate them. You cannot separate daylighting from noise issues, from thermal comfort, the IAQ topics. All of these have to be viewed as a cohesive whole because we are cohesive beings. And if you try to separate and look at one piece of these topics, I find that we actually will get into more trouble sometimes by focusing on one facet where, we've solved this problem, but we've created many of the other problems that we didn't factor into that equation because we're not looking at it from the whole picture. And this is why daylighting and lighting and all of these topics that I would consider, indoor environmental quality topics to be paramount.
Vicki Warden is the president of the Green Building Initiative. This organization, it's been a driving force for the creation of sustainable and healthy buildings for decades. And I believe so deeply in their work that I've had Vicki on the show twice. This is the second episode. And I've personally become involved with the organization as well. In this episode, we get to learn about the new Journey to Net Zero standard that was recently released. There's just so much to learn. This one is worth checking out. And I swear it's worth a listen just to learn about the new Net Zero calculator.
So the reality is that in a 80 building portfolio or a 50 building portfolio, we found that only about, I think it was 6.7% of all of the buildings that we evaluated were applying renewables against their utility structures and basis. And so it's going to be a smaller percentage of buildings that actually achieve the 50% minimum requirement for recognized, and a much smaller percent that achieve the 100%. And so what we have done is demonstrate through our progress report which buildings are at each level, either certified or recognized, what the specific percent reduction is they achieved, which metrics were used. And then the rest of the buildings, they were able to see where they were under that 50% mark. So we did have a third terminology called emerging. And so we're not using that as much now because it's easier really just to have 2 levels that folks are achieving. But the majority of those buildings are in progress to get to net zero, and we were able to help them demonstrate where they were.
It has truly been an honor to be able to speak with such brilliant, engaging, positive people. And I want to end this episode with a few thank yous. I want to thank Advanced Glazings for sponsoring this show, for Melissa Chanel, our marketing manager, Alex Milburn, our editor. And I want to thank all of the guests who are willing to share their wisdom and their time. And most importantly, I want to thank the listeners who make it all worthwhile. Please keep listening, keep creating, and keep making better buildings for humans. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.